Unite 2016.
Community and Wellbeing Officer Candidates Debate.
So thank you all for joining us in the studio today. Before we start the debate, can I ask you all to just introduce yourself, give a brief introduction and tell us your main policies? Just a minute tops.
Don't look at me.
Okay, fine. I'm Dom Smoothies, obviously running to be Community and Wellbeing Officer. Manifesto can be broken down into three sort of key groups, I suppose: community engagement, facilities and services, and proactive support. So I want to re-establish neighbourhood reps so that we're systematically engaging and consulting with members, so that first year off-campus students make sure they do get involved from the get-go. Want to make sure that we're empowering the student voice to focus on national campaigns, issues that can't be focused just by YUSU alone, and making sure we're working together with other unions to do a lot of good in the country. Job shop to make sure we're promoting part-time jobs and volunteering opportunities for current students just to help them find work to support them through their studies. Facilities and services, Nightline, as mentioned by President candidates earlier, does need a lot more help and support and promotion. Facilities can do a lot better to sort of get them the good location that they need. Unity Health, Open Door, both need to be looked at. That's something I'm sure we'll be discussing soon. And Procreative Support, just making sure students feel confident and we're building their resilience so that it's not too much of a focus on crisis management, and UC doing everything they can to support students here.
Well, so I'm Roz. I am a third-year philosophy student, and my campaign has 4 main points. So the first one is financial empowerment. The second one is all about mental health. The third one is working more with part-time officers, and the last one is getting more student engagement. So financial empowerment basically is about getting the jobs to students through a jobs fair and sort of help with budgeting. The mental health one is both looking at Open Door but also the wider community and what the council can provide students, which at the moment there's a huge gap in the market for that. The third one, part-time officers. I think it's really important that part-time officers are given a much louder voice within USU and they're recognised as much as full-time officers. And I really want to work with them in order to make sure they're consulted in certain issues that are affecting sort of the people they represent. And the last one is student involvement, which has been talked about a lot already. It's about getting students more engaged every day with USU. And I want to do that through making officers a lot more visible.
And Jack?
Hi, I'm Jack. I'm your current LGBTQ part-time officer. And my main policies can sort of be summarised by the acronym BASIC. So I'm really basic. And the things I'm interested in looking at as a wellbeing and community officer are basically bettering the mental health service of a uni. So responding to a 46% rise in people seeking an open door treatment, with a rise in the budget for Open Door, more so than it's currently risen over the past 5 years. I want Open Door to be available for people on leave of absences. I want the cap on sessions to be lifted. Affordable accommodation. I want us to freeze campus rents. I want all new uni accommodation to be below the average current price for rental lets. I want a sensible drug policy that puts protecting students at the heart of it rather than shaming them. I want iconic new buildings on campus. So as part of a new redevelopment scheme that the uni's initiated, they're going to be offering us a new student union building. And I want the building to be iconic and I want it to reflect the needs of the community at York. And the final one is C, so campaigns. I want more campaigns being run by the union, particularly on those issues that Don mentioned earlier, the national ones that we alone in York aren't able to solve here. So things like Prevent, things like the general rise in fees, things like the general crisis in mental health, stuff like that. But I think it's really important for us to link up with other unions on. So that's it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the issue of mental health. So both Jack and Ross, you put mental health as your number one list of priorities. Dom, it's not on your list. You do mention about Unity Health, but why do you not specifically mention mental health?
So I pretty much focus more on facilities and services, making sure that they're empowered to be supporting mental health as much. Proactive support and making sure USU's doing that bit to make sure that students in colleges are being trained how to deal with issues, are building their confidence, having those support networks available to them, realising the support networks available and promoting that through facilities, through services. Not so much focusing too much on one single officer and 1 year fixing the mental health crisis, because as Jack said, it's it's a national issue, and working with other unions to make sure that we're part of the voice and strengthening that voice to campaign and lobby nationally to make sure there's more funding, more support, because clinical support from the NHS and like facilities like Bootham Hospital being closed down, meaning students are being left to struggle. It's unacceptable, and it's nothing that one YUSU officer can do in a year. So making sure we're doing more wider campaigns is something I'd focus on more.
Yeah. Carry on.
I completely agree that mental health is not an issue that's going to be solved by one particular officer. But mental health is something that's really, really close to my heart. And I honestly believe that one officer can make a difference. So one of the things that I want to do is like small but mighty things, essentially, like free tea and coffee in your space, which doesn't exist anymore, and which I think is a really good place to go if you need a breather. And sometimes, you don't have time to have breakfast and you don't have money, or you forgot your wallet. Having a hot drink, especially in winter, can be sort of something that really can sort of pick you up for the day. But as well, I honestly think that we should think about the bigger picture. And one of my things is to lobby the council in order to be able to provide a plan as to how to move forward with this vacuum in the services. And I don't think that that's something that I can solve myself, but it's something that at least I'd like to pass on to the next officer, something that really needs to be a working progress and not just a one officer thing, but rather a kind of YUSU legacy.
Yeah, and Jack, why do you think mental health is important, like your number one priority?
Well, it is my number one priority. As a disabled student, I do know what the crisis is for, and I know what it's like to wait outside Unity Health for, a long time in the morning to wait for an opening slot. I know I've gone through Open Door. I know how bad it is. I know that the session cap is not fit for purpose with disabled students. So it is something I really care about, and I think I'm maybe a bit more optimistic about what a single SAB can do in a year, let alone a 2-year term. So I think the main thing is not just restricting it to just the SAB role, it's about getting people campaigning, getting people aware of the facts of the services in York. So a few weeks ago, I initiated a sort of bit of research on this before I was thinking of running, and I found just in a few weeks of research that there's been a 46% rise in people seeking open door help over the past 5 years, since 2011. There's been a 12% increase in the SSS budget overall, which obviously is dwarfed by a 46% rise. And that's the same for the open door budget, which is increased by about half of the rise for people seeking help. So we need to look at doing something quite radical and quite bold and doing it quite soon. And we're not going to be able to get that done unless we sort of initiate a wider movement among the student population that demands through petitions, through protests, the things that we're not getting from the university. The university needs to be honest. It needs to say that we need to plug the gap in mental health that's being created by the government and step in as a pastoral provider of care for students.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not entirely sure that big protests are the way forward. For example, the GSA released a report recently with Student Minds about kind of what could be improved within the university's mental health. And one of the big things they looked at was obviously Open Door, and they gave a few suggestions such as more variable appointment times, online evaluations, and those kind of things that might be able to shorten the time sort of between someone applying through Open Door and actually seeing someone. I think it is very important not to work against the university, but to work with the university and with Open Door. Open Door really do want to help as many students as possible, it's just they have very limited resources. So it's a matter of lobbying the university to provide more resources for Open Door, but it is also a matter of working with these institutions that are already in place in order to improve them rather than against them.
Yeah, that's all really interesting and all really good stuff that you said. Now, moving on from mental health, I just want to talk about accommodation because, Jack, you certainly mentioned accommodation and how you want to make it more affordable. Now, this was a question that was raised to the presidents earlier because they've also mentioned this, but how are you actually going to do that? Is it possible for a YUSU officer to actually do that? Or is that something that's outside of control and it's just an empty promise?
I can give you one concrete proposal that's actually been going around the union for quite a while. So when I first came to union in 2013, there was a referendum almost immediately, I think in week 3 of my first term, on the proposal to create a student letting agency. The proposal passed with a 90% margin of success. That's over 1,000 students voting in favour of it. But it's been kicked and sort of moved about by YUSU and kicked into the long grass. To a point where it's not being considered something that the union prioritises anymore. And this is despite us having the money for it. So it was estimated by the CEO and YUSU's sort of planning boards for the project that it would cost about 200k to set up. Now, for a £6 million charity, that isn't actually a very big ask. It's not asking us to go beyond our means as a charity. Last year alone, our budget increased by around £200,000. So that's from, let me get the figures, that's from 1.6 million to 1.86 million in 2015. We have the money for it. It's been shown to work in places like Leeds, places like Plymouth, places like Sheffield. It's something we could do. It's something we could do relatively quickly, and it would have an effect on the rental market in York within a few years. We also need to be making sure that the university doesn't build any more accommodation that goes above the average price on campus already and pressuring them to lower rents, and looking at where universities, where student unions have successfully pressured their universities to do that. In the past, the UCL is a big example, so they've recently had great successes in pushing down the price of university accommodation in London for students. So it's looking at where things have gone right and replicating that in York.
Yeah. And Dom, do you have something to say?
So yeah, sort of on the rent prices issue, the development of 2 new colleges coming up, sort of the concerns about prices and standardisation of good standard of accommodation which the university wants to propose, but they also want to up the rent prices constantly year on year, sort of claiming that it's to do with inflation and various things, but York is known to be one of the highest prices in the north, and really I think the university just needs to be held under scrutiny a lot more, and I don't think students are engaged on what's going on and making sure, I hate to use the buzzword because I know it's come up a lot, but transparency, but not just to show what USU's doing, but I think the officers have insight into what the university is up to, and being able to sort of pass on that information and saying this is what the university is doing, this is what's changed over the few years, because it's very easy for students who only here for a 3-year margin to come see the prices, accept that as a norm and go, when not even knowing that prices were so much lower just a few years ago, and it happens very subtly by the university. So making sure that pressure is applied from the union and that students know so they can add their voices to it, because the university does care about the reputation, and if you do add pressure and you do lobby, then that is something that can make change.
Yeah. Sticking with the topic of the students' financial situation, Ross and Dom, you both infer working with careers and improving students' financial situation. How are you going to do that? Can you just explain a little bit more?
So I have a sort of 2-pronged attack on this. The first one is budgeting. Now, budgeting, I don't want to sound lectury, but when I first came to university, I had no idea how to budget, and I was a mess. I ran out of money in 2 months. So I think I would have really benefited from getting experts to give me tips on how to make my money stretch further. And I want to do that, and I also want to add kind of just the budgeting booklet in the freshers packs, so that if students want to use it, they can. If not, they don't. It's kind of an offhand approach. I also want to introduce a part-time jobs fair. So this has worked at other universities, such as Leicester and Northumbria. And this is done usually in the first term, and students can just take a load of CVs. And the businesses they're giving the CVs out to actually want to have those CVs handed to them. So I've had the experience of trekking around town for 2-3 hours, handing around 20 CVs and getting 2 replies or none. And I think that is massively time consuming and extremely hard to find a job. And a lot of students need a job in order to be at university at the end of the day.
Dom, do you have anything to say to that?
Yeah, so sort of 3 points, I suppose. On budgeting, last year, in my second year, the Advice and Support Centre launched their Need Some Dough campaign to help train students to do with budgeting, and it worked really, really well. They launched it through colleges. They were attending lots of events, so they were having wide impact and engaging with students in a way that wasn't sort of making students come to them, so they were approaching students, and it was really effective, and I think that is something that we continued and worked on and improved to make sure it does have that impact to help with budgeting. In terms of jobs and finding that, something I do want to work on personally. Job Shop was thrown around by a few candidates last year, presidents and welfare, and I think the issue was it sort of contrasted and worked against careers too much. So I want to sort of take away, make it a bit more niche and focus sort of more exclusively on just part-time work to support students looking for opportunities while they're studying, volunteering opportunities just to build up the CV and promote those sort of centrally so jobs are available for students and students don't have to go to them. And then work with careers to make sure they're being as sort of accessible for all things, including sort of graduation grad schemes, internships and all of the bigger things that students will want.
Yeah,
I totally agree with all of what's been said. The only thing I'd add So I think it's really important that our work on careers addresses the fact that certain groups within the student population experience more discrimination in the jobs market. So I think USU could do a lot of help by sort of creating a sort of an easy way for students in groups like disabled students, BME network, LGBTQ, women's, to sort of access the jobs market, because it's sometimes quite difficult for them to reach the opportunities that do exist. I think that'd be something that would be a really good thing to improve on.
Yeah. And finally, we've only got a minute left of the debate. Can I just ask you, so obviously Scott Dawson is our current Community and Wellbeing Officer. What do you think he has missed out on in his time? Like, what would you have done differently if you had been him? If you can each just summarise in a few words.
I think there were a few things he promised in his manifesto. For example, the career jobs database thing, which I think it's really sad that we haven't yet seen that come to surface yet. And it's something that I believe quite strongly in.
Yeah, I agree. Working on that, there's a lot he sort of lacklustered on. I'm a big fan. He had a lot of small wins through the year, and he was very uncontroversial and nice, but sort of sticking with what Jack said earlier, being a bit more bold and brash with the university to make sure you are keeping student interests at heart and making sure you're putting up that fight is something
I completely agree with Dom. I think what Scott's done really well, especially in light of his predecessors, is just building those bare basics that you need to have in the role. So things like the Liberation and Welfare Network, that has been completely revamped over the past few months. It's now a functioning committee, whereas before it was just an echo of its former self. So that's been a really positive achievement on Scott's part.
Thank you very much.
Candidates Interview Night 2016.